Good afternoon from Scar Island. um, Hope everyone is doing okay. It's a beautiful day, but not in our book. It's not a beautiful day. It's a very stormy day. And last we were reading chapter 23 called an intruder. What's an intruder? An intruder. Da, da, da. No, an intruder is someone that suddenly stops in or intrudes, gets into whatever it is you're doing suddenly and is not expected and isn't an intruder is usually someone you don't want to have come in. That you're doing something important or bad in this case, and you don't want anyone to be finding out about it and or seeing what you're doing or maybe yeah, that kind of thing. Anyway, someone is intruding. They're getting into some business that it doesn't involve them, pretty much. Anyway, so that last chapter was called The Intruder, and who was the intruder in this case? Into the bad things that were going on was the boy named Patrick, who usually delivered the mail or the food to the island. And he goes, "Where is everybody? What in the world's going on here?" And Sebastian grabbed him and he raised his sword and pointed at Patrick and said, "Grab him." So they were going to have. They got Jonathan. They've got Colin under forced, and now they've got Patrick. So what's going to happen next? Next chapter is chapter 24. All the grown-ups are dead and gone. Scary thought. Even I like grown-ups. After a few minutes, Patrick sat straining and panting, tied firmly to a chair. He'd been too surprised at first to run when the pack of wild boys had rushed him. They'd caught and tangled him in a tidal wave of arms and hands and pulled him to the ground. Then he'd started fighting. At first he'd gained ground. He'd wrestled and twisted and was almost free when he'd felt the tip of Sebastian's sword pressed against his neck. "Don't move an inch," Sebastian had warned. "Not an inch." Patrick had frozen, an arm around his neck, others pinning his arms to his sides, his lungs heaving, and looked into Sebastian's eyes. He must not have seen any bluff there. He was tied up and walked to the chair where he sat, looking around with wide eyes at the savage boys. Savage. Sebastian was pacing back and forth. He was grinding his teeth and idly swinging his sword. Wish I had a sword. His eyes darted around the dark room, his shadow thrown onto the wet stone walls by white flashes of lightning loomed and jumped as he walked. "Where is everybody?" Patrick asked again. "We're all right here," Sebastian said with a sneer, holding his eyes open. "We're all right here." "Yeah, but what about the Admiral? Mr. Vander? Where are all the grown-ups?" Benny, who was standing guard by Patrick's side, leaned in close to his face with his toothy sneer. "All the grown-ups are dead and gone," he said, "and that's just how we like it." Patrick looked at him like he was crazy. "What do you mean? You mean you killed him?" "No," Sebastian shouted, spinning in a puddle. "We had nothing to do with it. It was lightning. They were all struck by lightning." Patrick gulped and looked around at the ring of frightened faces. "What? All of them?" "Yes, all of them," Sebastian yelled, stamping his foot in the puddle. "We had nothing to do with it." Patrick lipped his lips and shrugged. "Okay, this is a crazy storm," he added, nodding his chin at the raging tempest howling through the broken window. "No, no," Sebastian said, resuming his pacing. "Not tonight. The last storm. What, 5 days ago?" Patrick went pale. His eyes widened even farther. 5 days? You've all been here by yourselves for 5 days? Sebastian stopped his walking and glared at him. "Yes, and we've been fine. Just fine." Patrick's eyes darted to the shattered sinner's sorrow, to Colin's bloody head and Jonathan's bloody nose. Aye, he said carefully, sure you have. But now we've got a new problem, Sebastian continued. What to do with you? I think you should let me go, Patrick tried. No, Sebastian said with a small smile. Then our game is over, and I'm not ready for that. I don't want to go back just yet. None of us do. I do. Shut up, Colin. Of course you do. We'll get to you in a second. First, what do we do with him? All eyes turned to Patrick. He looked nervously around. We could put him in the freezer with the grown-ups, someone suggested. Nah, Sebastian said. That wouldn't be very nice. Anywhere out of the way will be fine. How about the coal room for now? He nodded to Roger and Gregory. Take him down there. Leave a lantern on for him. Wait, Patrick protested. You never listened to why you came. There's a monstrous storm coming on. It'd be 100-year storm, they say. A hurricane. Class 5. Bringing in a terrible storm surge with it to historic high tides. Why, it could wash this whole place away. They told me I was mad to even try and make it out here, but I couldn't leave you all to drown. Sebastian rolled his eyes. Take him away, he repeated. You've got to listen to me. We're in a stone castle, Sebastian replied, his voice bored. Built on a stone island. It's been here for hundreds of years. Islands don't sink. Yes, they do. Everyone turned to Jonathan. It's true. This place is crumbling. The island is getting smaller. There used to be a beach and everything. He looked around at the silent faces. It's true. Think of those stairs leading down into the water from the gate. The whole bottom floor is already underwater. That's what the hatch is. Sebastian blew his breath out through flapping lips. Uh-huh. Nice try. Shut up, Jonathan. He looked back to the kids standing around Patrick. Take him away. Now. The boys stumbled away, dragging Patrick roughly between them. Sebastian paced back and forth while they were gone, his feet splashing in storm water puddles. Listen, man, Miguel said. You got to calm down and... Shut up, Sebastian snarled with wild eyes. He shook the sword in his hand. We're going to be fine. All of us. As long as you keep your mouth shut, you'll be fine, too. When the boys returned from the coal room, Sebastian turned and cocked an eyebrow at Colin. Now, back to you. And your punishment. Colin frantically shook his head. Gerald and Francis were holding him tight on top of the table, but now he was sitting up. Please don't cut me, Sebastian. Sebastian rolled his eyes again. I was never going to cut you, he snorted. Colin's eyes narrowed doubtfully. I wasn't. Jesus, I was just trying to scare you. Colin's body visibly relaxed until Sebastian continued talking. Besides, I have something better planned for you. The wind was an unending high howl now, as if the whole of the tortured sky was one great furious beast. It screamed through the broken window, bringing rain and chilling salty spray with it. The lightning was so constant that the moment of darkness between were more eerie and surprising than the flashes themselves. You two bring him, Sebastian said to Roger and Gregory, lifting his chin toward Jonathan. They grabbed him roughly by his elbows. And you guys bring him, he added to Francis and Gerald, still holding down Colin. He whispered something into Benny's ear, who nodded and ran off to the kitchen. Sebastian stalked off toward the darkened doorway that he led into the interior of Slabhenge. He paused at the exit. He gripped the sword in his teeth while he used both hands to light a candle, then looked at the crowd of boys waiting at the table. All of you, follow me. Bring a candle. He smiled a dangerous smile, full of sharp white teeth that glistened in the lightning. It's time to find out what Colin's punishment is. Okay, we'll go one more. What do you think? Chapter 25. A Crash and a Bang. They all followed Sebastian through the dark. The winding tunnels of slam hedges twisted corridors and staircases. It wasn't clear where they were going, or even if Sebastian had a destination in mind. But whenever Sebastian came to a choice between two halls, he chose the darker and narrower one. Whenever he had to choose between between staircases, between two halls was the first one. Between two halls, he chose the darker and narrower. When he chose between two staircases, he chose down. In a winding candlelight, in a winding. In a winding candlelight line, they passed through the dip that went by the hatch. It was only feet away down that last cramped stairway and around a corner. It was a riot of violent, eerie noises, louder than Jonathan had ever heard. Bangs and shudders and thirsty slurps and the high-pained squeaking of straining iron. Some boys slowed down on the landing that led down to the hatch. Most shivered and sped up. Finally, they came to a dark, little, windowless room, small and wet and cold, at the bottom of a crumbling staircase. It was an especially desolate and forgotten corner of a madhouse island. Rats hurried out as the boys came in with their splashing feet and flickering flames, brushing past their feet, causing some boys to cry out and jump. Altogether, the group nearly filled the room. The ceiling was low and dripping green slime. Even here, though, they could hear the I just worried I hadn't put record on there for a second. Even there, they could hear the storm raging away beyond the thick stone walls that surrounded them. It sounded far and angry, and above them, like they were below ground. Here we are, Sebastian said with satisfaction. It's perfect. The last kids in were Benny and James. Benny had a rope over his shoulder and a sack in his hands. James was carrying a wooden chair. Sebastian shook the chair and set it in the middle of the little floor. Its legs wobbled on the uneven stone. Colin was thunked down in the chair and tied firmly to it with the rope. Make sure it's good and tight, Sebastian said. When the knots were all tightened and Sebastian had checked them, he stood back and looked at Colin. You wanted to sneak around and steal like a little rat. Fine. Benny came up with the perfect punishment. You get to spend the night with the rats, all by yourself. Colin was panting, his forehead beaded with sweat. He pulled against the ropes binding him, but there was no give. The bag, please, Benny, Sebastian said, holding out his hand. He reached inside and pulled out a handful of something. We want to make sure the rats know their new roommate is here, he said, holding his hand up to the light. It was full of crackers and bits of cheese from the kitchen. Looking Colin in the eye, he scattered the food around Colin on the floor. He reached into the sack for another handful and tossed it on the floor, leading to the stairs. Pulling out more and more handfuls, he crumbled it together in his hands and sprinkled it onto Colin's lap. The boys all stood in silence, watching, wide-eyed. That should do it, Sebastian said, rubbing his hands on his pant legs. You should have lots of little friends tonight. Come on, let's go. You just gonna leave me here? You got it. Not forever. One long night ought to be enough to teach you a lesson, I think. We can talk more in the morning, you and I. The rest of the boys were already starting to plod back up the stairs. No one said a word. As each kid left with his candle, the room got darker and darker. Aren't you going to leave me a light at least? Oh, sure, Colin. Here you go. Sebastian took a candle from one of the kids leaving and held it out toward Colin. His fingers opened, and the candle fell to the floor. It sputtered and hissed and went out in a puddle. Oops, sorry about that. Good night, Colin. Sebastian, seriously, you can't, Jonathan began. Sebastian's head swung like a hunting panther to Jonathan. I can, Johnny, he seethed. I can. You had your chance. You picked your side. You'll get yours after dinner. Don't worry. Jonathan struggled against the boys holding him, but it was no use. He was dragged up the stairs behind Sebastian and Benny and the last candle. The last he saw of Colin, he was sitting in the growing blackness, eyes wide and lips trembling, all alone. Jonathan tried to pay attention as they made their way back to the dining room. At one point he thought they were close to where the library was, but they never saw it. The hatch, when they passed it, was making an unholy racket. like an army of water demons on the other side, raging to get in. No boys paused to listen this time. An army of watery demons on the other side. What's that sound like? Right? Something like that. They all stopped, cold, when they got back to the dining room. There were no longer puddles in the room. The entire floor was under an inch of water. It was black and dappled by rain blowing in through the window. The light of the candles still burning on the tables was reflected eerily on the surface. Lightning crackled, filling the windows with blinding light. There was a great boom of thunder that made them all jump. No letter writing tonight, Sebastian said, looking at the flooded room. We can do it first thing in the morning after the storm. Dinner time. Sebastian, this isn't okay, David said cautiously. It's fine. A little water won't hurt us. It's just 'cause the window's broken. Where are we going to sleep, man? Walter asked, pointing at their waterlogged mattresses still lying on the floor. You can bring your beds upstairs for tonight. There's plenty of room. Sebastian, Jonathan said, remember that what Patrick said about the storm and the surge and... Shut up, Jonathan. No one cares what Patrick said. Don't piss me off. I'm still deciding what your punishment is. He looked at Gregory and Roger. One of you keep your hands on him at all times. I know the little punk will run away to save this little friend first chance he gets. They ate dinner sitting on the tables, their feet on the chairs. The storm was so loud they couldn't talk over it. They kept having to relight their candles, blown out by the hard fists of gusting wind that hammered through the room. Jonathan sat where Sebastian had been carving with his sword a couple of days ago, flanked by a guard on either side. He fingered the crudely notched letters Sebastian had inscribed in the wooden tabletops. Scars. S-C-A-R-S. He looked around at the soggy boys, glumly eating, shivering and soaked, sitting in the near darkness, with rain blowing in the broken window. His mind kept circling around Colin, bound in blackness, swarmed by giant rats. He couldn't swallow a bite. We need to keep this furnace lit, Sebastian shouted over the storm. Jonathan, it's your turn. You two go with him. He tossed a stale roll to Roger. You can give that to our prisoner. Don't untie him, though. Jonathan managed to eat a dry bite of bread and slumped down to the coal room, Roger and Gregory right behind. Patrick was tied to his chair in the middle of the room, under a dangling lantern, surrounded by piles of coal. The furnace glowed and hissed behind him. His face was grim, and he was drenched in sweat. Jonathan gasped and unbuttoned the top button of his own shirt. He'd forgotten how hot it was in the dark little cellar. There was a large puddle at the foot of the stairs. Jonathan frowned, but he didn't remember the coal room having any puddles. Have you come to your senses, then? Patrick asked. We're just here to feed the furnace, Roger said. Here. He held out the roll. Patrick looked at it, his hands tied behind his back. You'll have to untie me. No way, Roger answered. He tore a chunk off the roll and shoved it into Patrick's mouth. Get to work, Jonathan, he said over his shoulder. I don't want to be down here forever. Jonathan was looking at the puddle on the ground. It was spreading and growing as he watched. He looked closer and saw the little rivulets of water running down the stairs along the wall. Water's getting down here, he said, pointing. From upstairs. Who cares? Well, that means... Look, just get to work, okay? I'll help. Jonathan and Gregory started shoveling coal into the wheelbarrow while Roger fed Patrick bites of roll. You boys are crazy, Patrick said when they stopped gasping for breath after dumping the first load into the fiery furnace. You can't keep going like this. You need to get out of here. Quiet, Roger said. We're fine. What happened to your nose? He asked, looking at Jonathan. Jonathan sniffed and touched it gingerly with sooty fingers. It was still sore. Nothing. Just an accident. Aye, Patrick said quietly. I bet plenty of accidents happen around the boy with the sword. Come on, keep shoveling. I want to go to bed. They were just about to open the furnace doors for the second load of coal when they heard a crash from above them. More than a crash. A shattering, shuddering explosion that echoed down the stairs. They froze in mid-motion, then turned to look at the staircase. There was a moment of near stillness. Then the water trickling down the stairs increased to a steady stream an inch deep from wall to wall, water falling into the coal room in dirty little cascades. What the hell? Patrick breathed. From upstairs came the sound of screaming. Jonathan and Gregory dropped their shovels, and all three boys tore up the stairs at a run. Wait, Patrick called. Don't leave me here. But they were already gone up the stairs and through the kitchen and into the dining room. The room was in chaos. The storm, which had already seemed impossibly fierce, was doubled in strength and fury. All the windows had blown out, every single one, and the door was ripped off its hinges, leaving one whole wall open to the raging wind and rain. All the candles were out, leaving the room in darkness, except when it was lit by flashes of lightning. The boys were all huddled behind the tables. Jonathan, Roger, and Gregory stopped in their tracks. The water in the room was no longer an inch deep. It was over their ankles and rising. "Look at that!" Miguel shouted over the thundering. "In the courtyard!" Ducking heads peeked from behind the tables. Jonathan's eyes peered through the pelting rain into the darkness behind the glassless windows. For a moment there was only wet, howling blackness. Then a bright white strobe of lightning lit the scene, and he saw it. A boat drifting in the courtyard, sailing and bobbing right in the middle of the school. Jonathan, Sebastian, and a few others ran to the windows, standing a couple of cautious steps back and squinting into the darkness. Outside, lightning flashed again. "It's empty! That's the mail boat, the one the guy came in. The gate must have blown open." Jonathan looked down the row of terrified faces. "It's floating out there," he said. "There's enough water inside it for it to float." They looked out at the boat rocking its way through the storm toward them, rising and falling with the waves. "It ain't just puddles out there," Walter said. "It's flooded. The island's under water." They looked down at the water, now above their ankles. From behind them came a wrenching, shrieking sound, followed by a thunderous bang. It rang out from the doorway that led into Stamphenge, and for a moment overpowered even the sound of the storm raging around them. Jonathan splashed through the water to the doorway. He took one step into the lightless corridor and listened. He heard echoes of banging and rushing and a wet, slurping roar. "It's the hatch!" he screamed, the wind whipping the words out of his mouth. "It's opened!" That's a good place to stop. I was planning on reading 2 chapters each night until it's over. And we, as you can see, we're almost there. Next one is chapter 26, Going Alone. What is going to happen? It looks deadly, doesn't it? And it looks like the last chapter might be, I don't know, I won't say what it might be. But it doesn't look good for our students, our students. Yeah, our reform school students. These boys that are captive on this island. But I'm going to stop there, and I'm going to tell you that we're going to have a final project when I finish reading the book, and that's going to be fun. And I'll let you know when that will be. And so listen to the chapters. If you read them again, learn your facts about the story, learn your what happened, when, kind of things, who, what, where, and when, kind of questions. And we're going to play Jeopardy with the story and what happened and who was what and what was where. And then maybe we'll have a discussion too, of course, about the book, what you thought, and what was going on. So, till next time, chapter 26, Going Alone. We're going to go alone right now to have close to a little after 4 here. Cinco de Mayo. Happy Cinco de Mayo. Until Cinco de... Oh, siete... 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 de Mayo. Good night and goodbye for now.